worship, good to think about God's creation in what is known as the season of creation. Let me just give you a little bit of background about the season, if we could have the PowerPoint up. So it's a fairly new development within the life of God's church. In 1989, an Orthodox ecumenical patriarch, Demetrios I, in Constantinople, as we know it, Istanbul, said that September the 1st should be a day of prayer for creation, aware even at that time of the way in which the created order was deteriorating. And so that was the inception of this idea of having a special time set aside for prayer for creation. And over the years, that's been taken up by the church worldwide, so that now that this is something that is a worldwide season that has lasted from September the 1st to the Feast of St. Francis on October the 4th, the patron saint of the environment and natural things. And so during this period, God's church is thinking and reflecting about creation and praying into that whole area of need in our world today. So we're going to have the reading, first of all, from Isaiah 32, verses 14 to 18, about the being at peace with creation. And that's the theme of this year, 2025. For the palace will be forsaken, the populous city deserted, the hill and the watchtower will become dens forever, the joy of wild asses, a pasture for flocks, until the Spirit from on high is poured out on us, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field, and the fruitful field is deemed a forest. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. The effect of righteousness will be peace, and the result of righteousness, quiet, trust forever. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. It's a vision there that in the future, despite the despoilation of the earth, there's going to come a time when God's Spirit is poured on us, humanity, so that we can be truly what God intended us to be, stewards of God's creation, and it becomes fruitful once again. There is a tie, in other words, between human behaviour and the well-being of creation. And now Genesis 1, where this same linkage is made. Genesis 1 and verses 26 to the end of chapter 1. This is the afternoon of the 6th day of creation. The animals have been created in the morning, and in the afternoon, it's afternoon. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth. You shall have it for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made. And indeed, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. I think this is quite a daring theme for this year's season of creation. Peace with creation, because if you look at creation, creation is anything other than at peace. Just think about the issues that we face regarding the created order. Hardly a week goes by and we don't hear about some aspect of it. Global warming, climate change, weather disruption, weather pollution, pollution in rivers, plastics in the sea, continuing degrading of our whole environment that is poisoning the whole of our world and is actually poisoning us, although we don't hear about it a great deal. Many of the plastics that we've scattered into the environment end up in the rest of the created order, including us. We don't notice it, see it. I was at a festival, Greenbelt Festival over the other, and had there a lecture from toxicology, an ecological medical doctor. In other words, she's trying to think about medicine and the holistic understanding of medicine. She's particularly looked into the area of toxicology and the way that toxins are entering into our environment. And it really is very deeply concerning. Something that is largely being ignored by the ruling authorities that govern us. This came home personally to us after Storm Sept in 2023. Properties either side of us were flooded, particularly the one to our left. 2 inches of water came into their house, and it meant a whole year of disruption for them, the next door neighbour. That water came within feet of our house. Kirklington had never been flooded before, within living memory. Neighbours either side of us now have taken action to clear water from their property, put drains in so that the water flows away more easily. We are painfully aware now, as a village, when it rains, what will be the effect if that is a saturation, so that water cascades off the ground and falls into the churchyard. It seems to collect there. We're over the hedge from the churchyard, so we're not right at the front line, but we are fairly close to the first line. It gets flooded in the village. So I want us to reflect together this morning about a subject that we perhaps don't often think about. I want us to dwell upon two things. First of all, our thinking, and then our practice. And our reading from Genesis actually brings these 2 points to us that we've just heard about. Our thinking, particularly concerning how we understand dominion We are made in God's image, male and female. He created them in his own image. He made. So we, as it were, are the image of God. What does that mean? It's closely tied, notice, with that understanding of dominion. In other words, we have here a picture that is being drawn from the ancient Near Eastern cultures of that day, where a ruler who governed a territory would use images of his facial features on coins, on statues, various in temples, etc., to actually put his image there, to actually tell people, I am the one that rules you. And at the time when Genesis 1 was probably being put together, it was probably written during the time when the Jewish people were in Babylon, under the rule of one of those dominating authorities that exercised force and cruelty to subjugate people. They wrote this. And they ended up with this picture about what human beings were meant to be like. Made in the image of God. Under God's rule and authority. And under God's rule and authority, we are meant to be the image of God towards the created and natural order. So we are, as it were, the projection of God's authority to rule over the world, which is given to us to care for and to bless the created order. In other words, this is foundational to a biblical understanding of what it means to be human. This is why we cannot but take the creation seriously and the environmental crisis in which we are going through. In 1967, a very significant article was written by a scholar called Lynn White. It was named The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. And in that paper, he argued that the current state of ecological crisis and degradation came about because of the concept of dominion here in Genesis 1. In other words, it's basically down to Christians that we're in a mess. That was his argument. That has been reacted to, and in fact it's been shown to be a total misunderstanding of what is meant. It's out there within the general culture that in some way God's church is responsible in some measure for the environmental degradation we see around. And it's really coming with an adequate understanding of what we mean by dominion that is in fact important for our thinking, our understanding, so that we can adjust our behaviour. So how was God's relation with the created order? Was it one of dominating, control, and ordering? That's not the picture that is being painted. It's far from that. Rather, God wills nature's well-being, its flourishing, its multiplication. God wants this world to flourish. And so divine dominion is something that is positive, is life-giving, should be leading to a flourishing. But the Bible knows full well that our understanding of what it means to have dominion can go wrong. In Ezekiel, we have a very interesting passage about the shepherds of Israel. And in Ezekiel chapter 34, the prophet accuses the leaders of the people of Judea at that time. You have not strengthened the weak, you have not healed the sick, you have not bound up the injured, you have not brought back the strayed, you have not sought the Lord, the lost, but with force and harshness you have had dominion over them. In other words, easily people in authority can slip into force and harshness. With forceness and harshness, you have had dominion over them. It could go wrong. And in fact, it has gone wrong. We would not be in the state that we're in were it not for very foolish decisions that we have taken in ignorance, thinking that we can just manipulate and control and exploit the natural resources around us. This is so deeply fixed in the human mindset, in the culture of post-industrialization. And it is only now, as we look at the ecological crisis, that we are having to rethink all of those things. Not just as a Christian church, but as humanity. But the Christian church needs to be right in the mix of that. And we should be right at the forefront of working for that flourishing and well-being of the natural world. Jesus teaches us that the Good Shepherd lays down his life for sheep. The Good Shepherd is not one who rules with harshness, but lays down his life for the well-being of us. So we, made in his image, are to actually be an expression of the way that God is towards creation. So it's cockeyed, isn't it? But actually, it's the creation that is laying down its life for us human beings. Just take one area where I have some interest in the whole area of bird life. In my lifetime, farm birds have decreased by 61%. Woodland birds by 35%. Garden birds, 60%. Starlings, I can remember when we had a meal, say a chicken, we would put out the chicken on the lawn, and within seconds, starlings would just swoop down and it would be gone within half an hour. You do that now, you'll be waiting for the starlings. Starlings by 83%. 83%. That's just one area. Birds now common are extremely rare. The turtle dove. When was the last time you heard a turtle? I think I've only heard a turtle dove on On a few occasions in my bird watching life, I've only seen one on about one occasion. A bird as common as a spotted flycatcher. You may not have heard of it, but it's quite a common bird. Sorry, it was quite common. When I went out bird watching, I would see one in the countryside. It would fly up on its perch and go back to the same perch. And in the shore side, it was a spotted flycatcher, always returning to the same perch. You hardly see any. In other words, the climate crisis is, I believe, a spiritual crisis. It's a spiritual crisis of what has happened as humans think that their dominion actually means something that can be exploitative, that we can just use things without any regard for how we use them. And this very text that we read stands as a testament, an incredible act of theological imagination against the ancient myths that were used in those cultures. The Babylonian creation myth is horrible. It's about the battle between the gods that are suspicious of their mother. And they band together to force their mother and to blow an evil wind down her mouth until her belly explodes. And from that explosion, the world is born. In other words, violence, control, domination was the creation myth of the ancient Near Eastern people of Babylon. Now do you see the significance of Genesis 1? What a wonderful act of theological imagination by a people that were under that control, saying in their prayer and in their gatherings in exile, suffering under the boot of that old regime, control and domination. We believe in a different reality. You see how exciting that is? How incredibly imaginative that is? What a wonderful invitation that is to all of us to take seriously the creative. So that is dominion, our thinking. But what about our practice? Now here I'm going to probably become a little bit controversial because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read the Bible, suddenly something that I've read for years, you suddenly see something new and you think, wow, why haven't I seen that? Have you ever had that? I have. And this is one of those passages I have never noticed before. The impact and the import of verses 29 and 30. Let me read them again. Did we just hear them and it just rolled over us? Or did we understand what it was saying? God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath, I have given every green plant. In other words, God created the world to be vegetarian. when I read that, just only a matter of a few years ago, I thought, what? Why haven't I seen that before? That is so weird. Why have I been blind? So I began to look into it a little bit more. I've never heard a sermon or a theological thinker really well on that whole thing. I've never read a commentary that really comments on these verses. It's just elided over. But as I reflected on it, I noticed that when we turn to Genesis chapter 9, after the flood, we have God making another covenant with human beings. This is what it says in Genesis 9. Be fruitful, God says, and multiply, fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth, on every bird of the air, on everything that creeps on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. In other words, eating meat, fish, is part of the post-sin world. Say that again. Meat, fish, consumption of them is part of the post-sin world. It's good to debate this afterwards, because this seems quite disturbing. But clearly God is giving permission. He's actually saying, yes, go on, then you can have this meat. You can use this meat. But that is not God's original intention. And then we notice that at the end point of history, what we call the eschaton, the future hope. What is the future hope? The lion comes down with the lamb. So the beginning is vegetarian. The end is vegetarian. In the middle, we are given permission to eat meat. I think this takes some consideration. If we want to be disciples of Jesus, the one who points us clearly towards that future hope, and who has come to save us from the mess that we get ourselves into as human beings, both individually and collectively. If we believe in Jesus and that he points us, he directs us towards that future, I think we need to take cognizance of it. 85% of meat we consume in this country, in the UK, comes from what is called intensive mega farming. More often these creatures are in sheds rather than out in the natural environment. 85% of the country. Meat-based meals are 14 times the impact on the environment than plant-based. 14 times environmental impact. So as I looked into this, as part of my own personal walk with God, I've come to the point where only in the last few years I've given up. hear me correctly. I'm not saying that you should. I'm not saying that this is something that I would teach as a requirement. It isn't. But it is something that we should think. It is something that we should reflect upon to come to our own understanding of what we should do with regard to how we conduct ourselves. And that if we want to take seriously of walking gently and treading gently on this earth, then I think one of the most important areas that we can consider is the Genesis 1 mandate that we are given seeds, plants to, and that we should consider producing such. This is teaching unlike what I normally give. But I give it because I believe that this is part of Christian discipleship. And I share with you the journey that I've been on and am on still. We still consume fish. My wife's diet is complex because of other conditions. And she needs to have what fish gives in order to be able to cope, because she can't cope with some of the plants, the lentils, or the beans. Not too many of them. So I'm being quite frank here, I'm not a vegan. I'm a vegetarian, but I'm not vegan. But I have decided that as part of my own personal discipleship, I'm called to consider this pathway and to walk. And personally, I would prefer not to have fish. That would be my own personal desire. So, I leave it with you. As a matter for consideration, no more than that. But actually we should consider thinking about reducing our meat consumption. Certainly from a medical point of view, processed foods, we should think about that seriously for the good of our country. This world is wonderful. It's splendid. We've just come back from a holiday. And one of the things that we are tempted to do when we go on holiday is to go into galleries and look at the artwork that's there, if it's a place that is known for its local artists. So in our holiday in Hay on Wye, we went into a gallery, into two galleries, and we indulged ourselves in two pieces of art, both of which are stunning pieces about the created world. One of a sunrise over a view from Hay on Wye, from Hay Bluff, looking out east for the rising sun, and the other named Eden on the back. And it's a beautiful portrayal by this artist, Nikki Thomas. And I emailed her last night to thank her for her work. And she got that. And in it, she has a little poem she's composed herself about the divine presence seen all its and my work the art. We live still in the pool. Let us do all that we can to celebrate